Hello everyone. This is Sachin Gaur, and we have our 15th virtual club meeting. And the idea of the club meeting, as all of you know, is to bring together people who are innovating and people who can benefit from those innovations. Today, the title of the presentation is Supporting Validation of New Technologies in Clinical Environments. As we all know that new technologies at times are not really, let's say, fully understood by everyone. And when people are building these technologies, of course, they know more about those technologies. But in the environments that they are being deployed, sometimes people are concerned whether they can trust it, whether it is reliable, are the results reproducible from one geography to another, and things like that. And bringing this confidence among clinicians is very important. We couldn't have done this discussion today better than having Dr. Vasanth today. Because Dr. Vasanth, I was just speaking to him, before we started the webinar, comes with a deep background in clinical work himself. He's a radiologist. He's worked for, as a clinical radiologist for more than 15 years. And slowly he has been over the last 4 years transitioning onto the other side, where he's building technologies which are benefiting, the radiological pathways of, delivering care. So with this immense experience, being in the front line of developing technologies that help people validate, so they are validating technologies which bring trust among clinicians. And Dr. Vasanth, being a clinician himself, being the chief medical officer of CARPL.AI, is probably the most experienced person in my circle that I can say could enable this conversation to be deconstructed in a way that it could be understood and appreciated among our community of health tech experts. So a warm welcome to you, Dr. Vasanth. And I would really like to invite you today to share your experience, your work, how you are enabling trust to being created in validating these technologies. And also, I would like to share in the chat a link of a tool that we have developed, which can enable the participants to connect with each other. Because often it happens that people come and join these meetings and they may want to also connect with each other. So we have also developed this tool that I would share in the chat, which can help you to connect with each other and maybe find more meaningful conversation even after the event is over. So without further ado, Dr. Vasanth, the floor is yours. I hope everything works fine with technology.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity, Sachin. And thank you everyone who has taken their time out on a Saturday evening to attend this session. So as Sachin introduced me, I used to practice radiology, in my clinical role, in my clinical role till about 3-4 years back. I just used to be a tech enthusiast till that point, and then things changed. Now I am fully into building a tech company. Slowly and eventually I've given up my routine clinical practice. But what I've seen is my clinical background is helping our team build tech solutions in such a way that it's understands the user perspective, the doctors or the radiologist perspective in our case, and make it easy for us to kind of help them adopt to that solution. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm also going to turn off my video here just to avoid some distractions. So the topic for today is supporting validation of new technologies in clinical environments. So I'm a radiologist. The space I work is in very niche radiology AI space, but that's the newest technology in the town. and every new big tech company, including the Facebook, Google, Amazon, everybody is investing heavily in the space, broadly in the AI space, and more specifically in the radiology AI space. That's my domain, but I'm kind of constructed this lecture and talk, or maybe a conversation, in such a way that uh, I have extracted the experiences from us running a radiology AI tech solution in clinical practice, translated into other new technologies also. So I have constructed this in such a way that the principles, the broad principles which I'll be talking about, will apply to any new technology. If you think of the technology trends broadly that are kind of transitioning healthcare, they fall into 8 broad categories. The leader being the artificial intelligence category. The second important and widely used category is the wearable technology and sensors. It's even adopted by the patients and the general population more heavily than doctors themselves. The third broad category is robotics and automation. The fourth is virtual reality and augmented reality. The other 3 categories, the cloud computing, blockchain technology, and big data, are more of a tech play. So I would focus for this lecture on these first 4 categories because they are clinician interfacing trends. The other 3 are more something which happens under the hood in the background, may not be very relevant to the clinicians here. So the 4 broad categories again. So artificial intelligence in healthcare, everybody is very familiar with what's happening around there with the large language models, the chat GPTs, the bots and everything. It's just exploding the applications of AI in general use, in dialogue use, in your day-to-day life, and more so in healthcare also. In fact, the business analysts have projected an exponential rise in the market size of AI solutions in the healthcare. They are kind of hitting through the roof. $100 billion is the kind of projection they are looking at in 2030, by 2030. If you think of applications or the uses of AI in healthcare, the primary role would be improving the diagnosis and treatment planning. The second is a personalized medicine, right? How do we move from a general population based medicine to a personalized medicine? What suits to me specifically as not being part of a group of patients? The third is the enhanced medical imaging, which is our domain, very much our domain. So, in fact, the most significant change has happened in the radiology AI space because of the advancement of this new technology called deep learning and the advancement of convolutional neural networks. Everything started in the year 2012 with AlexNet, Jeffrey Hinton and its team going on to win the AlexNet competition, squarely as compared to humans. From then, things have moved very fast. Today, as we speak, more than 500 applications have gotten FDA approval for clinical use in radiology alone. There are close to 400 companies in different parts of the world working on building these AI solutions. And there is an uptick on the adoption also. The large hospitals may not be in India, but across globe in US and Australia and Singapore have already started using AI applications in their routine practice. So that's one kind of area which is seen good traction and adoption. And the other areas where AI are helping in healthcare is streamlining the clinical decision process as well as predictive analysis for population health. How do you make generalized assumptions for a population using the big data which you have acquired over the years? So a lot of this has been used during the COVID times. You would have seen the predictions of the number of mortality, the number of cases, the number of patients who will kind of get affected during each of those waves. All those things were made using deep learning, tools, and most of them were kind of correct. So some of them were way off because of the new variants keeping coming up time and again. But those tools were able to kind of predict the peaks and helped the authorities to manage those surges quite effectively. And the final bottom line of healthcare is how do we reduce healthcare costs using some of these tools. So these are the applications, and imaging being the leader. All of them are just following up as far as AI is concerned. I will briefly touch upon the other broad technology trends that are evolving. The second area, as I said earlier, is the wearable technology and sensors. Uh, they are making everything from smart ring, smart watches, smart goggles, smart socks, smart toilets. So everything is kind of IoTs, and the day-to-day activities are being continuously monitored, tracked, and they are showing incredible results also, right? In case, for example, managing chronic conditions like diabetes, like a patch which is subcutaneous and inserted for 2 weeks helps in the continuous glucose tracking and monitoring, helps predict dangerous hypoglycemic episodes which typically happen during sleeps, and most of the patients end up kind of dying in their sleeps. So some of these tools are helping avert those kinds of unexpected hypoglycemic episodes and unexpected mortalities. And such tools also help physicians do remote monitoring of elderly patients as well as ICU patients. Today, the ICU beds are in very much demand, right? Not all hospitals have enough ICU beds to cater to the critical care patients. What if some of these patients can be moved to their homes, to their comfort of homes, and monitored remotely? So those kind of operations are possible because of these remote monitoring sensors that are available there. And also disabled patients, the other patients with other handicaps, so can be monitored very effectively using these sensors and tools. I'll come to the challenges in using these tools in the later part of this lecture. The third area, which is showing incredible kind of say of changes, is robotics, right? So we have heard a lot about the Da Vinci systems. So this picture here is showing a real surgery being performed by a surgeon using the Da Vinci system, right? It's being widely used in uh, many tertiary care hospitals for general surgical operations, including gynecological or gastrointestinal surgeries. So the advantages being, they are more precise. The processes can be controlled, and the attention span of surgeons, it's not dependent upon the loss of attention span of the surgeons. So all those advantages. In fact, Stryker has quite recently come up with a system called Mako system for orthopedic surgeries. And similarly, the other robotic component is the exoskeletons, right? Exoskeletons are just the additional robotic based units which patients who had spinal cord injuries or affected by strokes or other kind of neurological conditions can kind of wear and start moving around, right? Start walking, getting up and stand. People who have been limited to wheelchairs can now use these kind of additional robotic toolkits to move around and live their normal lives. And we know about these care robots and disinfectant robots. I think many of us would have seen this during the COVID times. The hospital systems, the deliveries of medicines, and the disinfection was done by some of these robotic instrumentations. The fourth important category is the VR and AR categories. So we are coming across this in the medical education space very extensively, right? So the access to cadavers is getting limited, and with AR and VR tools, now young professionals, medical professionals are getting trained more extensively and more deeply than what they used to kind of have in their part of the training. And surgeons are now performing surgeries using these goggles which they can wear, and the images from these CT scans or MRIs can be projected onto the operating field to make them a more precise incision and precise kind of surgeries during complex procedures. As you can see in this picture here, the left side picture is showing a surgeon wearing on one of those AR head-on device and doing a surgery with inputs from the MRI of the study being fed to him directly over the surgical field of view. The other kind of tools, the one I'm displayed here on the right side, is kind of is also being used by nursing attendants or nursing care providers to do very good blood drawing injections, correct? So that's a challenge if the patient is obese, or even for child and infants. Uh, how do you do that very precisely without contaminating the blood specimen or even doing a lot more pricks? So those kind of tools are available there. They're being used now very extensively, and more tools are coming up. All these kind of displays I'm putting up have crossed the stage of clinical validation, on-site validation, regulatory approvals, and robust testings, and post-market surveillance phases. But more such tools are coming out, which are in the early stages of validations. That's what we are going to talk about, how to take them rapidly to those cycles to adoption. So coming back to the concept of validation, right? The concept of validation is again would mean different things to different people. So if you are talking about the developer or the person who built that particular new technology, when they think of validation, they are just very much narrowly focused around, does it work as I designed it, right? Is it working, the tool working the way I thought it should work? So that's the kind of very narrow approach they think about when they talk about validation. If you go to a researcher, someone who is interested in doing publications, or even a biostatistician in your hospital, they are very much worried about whether the testing process, the validation process follows statistically sound principles, right? They would come up with all those, p values, the AUC curves, and other metrics to evaluate or design the validation process in such a way that it meets the statistical strength, it does sound statistical principles, it follows statistical principles. That's their view of validation. But if you talk to a clinician, they have a completely different view. They have a very simplistic view. Does this technology help my patient? Does it help me to deliver a better care to my patient? So that's simply it, right? So all the three different stakeholders, or maybe multiple different stakeholders, should come together on understanding what they mean when they talk about validation. If you are taking a new technology to a hospital, you want them to validate, you should be very clear about what you mean when you say by validation, because you might be talking to the biostatistician in the hospital, or you might be talking to the clinician, or even patients in some instances. So what do you exactly mean by validation is something you should be very, very clear about before embarking on the journey. And why do we need validation, right? I think everyone would agree with that. So we need validation because the patient safety is the center of everything we do in healthcare, right? The first and foremost principle any doctor assigns to is that do no harm, right? Let things go naturally. If you are doing an intervention, it shouldn't be harmful to the patient. So that's the first and foremost principle. So when you are validating new technology, the first and foremost principle is it should be completely and comprehensively safe to the patient. The second important reason to build validation is to build trust on the healthcare industry as well as on the new technology from among different stakeholders. The primary being the patient, right? Today, I don't think all patients trust their healthcare provider completely. There is a certain degree of trust deficit. If a doctor advises a new surgery, the first thing most patients think about is, are they advising this purely based on I need it, or is there a ulterior motive of making money for this advice? So that is the kind of trust deficit that is unfortunately which exists today among between the patients and the doctors. So doctors are very skeptical about using any new technology. They want to be very transparent about what they are bringing in, and while ensuring patient safety, they also want to show that is safety, that the new technology is both safe as well as effective for them. To build that kind of trust, you need to do a proper validation study. The third thing is, clinicians are very much aware that not all technologies will operate to their promised goals, correct? So they are very much aware. But one thing they want to be kind of looped into is that what are the limitations of this technology, so that I can make my own informed decisions, right? If a particular technology claims that it can be 100% accurate, I know deep in my mind I'm sure that it cannot be 100% accurate today. Might be it might take some time. But what I want to be understanding is that where does it fail, right? So that when I use the technology in my practice, I'm aware of its constraints and I can make an informed choice of using the technology or not using it in scenarios where I know it would probably fail in 50% of cases. The fourth important reason why do you need validation is compliance with regulatory requirements. All hospitals, all clinics are regulated by certain kind of certifications or some regulatory bodies, depending upon what geography or what domain they operate upon. They all want to be compliant with the requirements of that regulatory body. So any new validation study you do will fall through those compliance requirements before being kind of even taken up for testing. The final important goal is, while all these four principles are made sure, the ultimately the technology should in certain way should be helping to improve the patient outcomes. Otherwise, there is no point, right? So if I'm investing my time into testing a new solution or validating a new solution, or even thinking about starting you to use a new solution, the ultimate aim should be some kind of improvement in the patient outcome. So these are the 4 or 5 reasons why we need to do validation. And as if you can briefly classify the validation process, there are 3 steps to that. One is the preclinical phase. Second, more important part is clinical validation. That's what we are talking about today. And the third, again, very crucial part is the post-market validation. Right? Once the system is approved, the system is regulatory cleared, the clinic has paid money to buy your solution, start using it, you should be able to monitor or surveil your tools and alert the clinicians of any potential scenarios where it might fail or fall out of your expected performance metric. So that's an important part. While we are very obsessed with getting these tools through clinical validation and getting it commercially live, we should be very cognizant of the fact that if there is some kind of adverse event that happens in the post-market phase, it's highly likely that the tool will be withdrawn and the clinical systems would go into their own shell again and be very reluctant to test out any new solution in that particular space. So that's very important to do a post-market validation also. So coming to this kind of tips and tricks kind of session, what I've made here is I've just kind of broken down the entire concept of getting support from clinical systems for validation of any new tech product into 5 basic rules. If you follow these 5 rules or 5 steps, it's very likely that your tool would be, or your technology will be easily kind of taken up for validation in the clinical environments, and in fact even getting used in the commercial clinical ecosystem. So we'll go one by one. The first and foremost rule, anyone building new technology or anyone trying to pitch new technology to a hospital should be aware is, you start with the value and provide strong evidence from preclinical validation. So what do I mean by that? Right. Now, all these 5 basic rules, what I've done that is I've laid out these rules and I've brought out case studies from our personal experience, from CARPL.'s experience, from my experience as a radiologist to support how do you do that. So the first rule, start with value and provide strong evidence from preclinical validation. I will talk about this, right? What do you mean by preclinical validation? Preclinical validation is everything that happens without involving a live patient in a live clinical environment, right? So it could mean testing retrospectively, doing retrospective modeling, computer simulations, or even doing laboratory or animal testing, depending upon what is your solution, right? So all these evidences, you should have strong evidences from preclinical studies before you go and approach a clinical system to do a clinical validation, right? That's some first thing. The second thing, again, I have listed out these different types of preclinical validation. In vitro testing is the laboratory testing or the culture testing. Animal testing, I talked about. Computer modeling and simulations you can do. You don't need to involve real patients. You can just use modeling techniques to figure out how this would work in a clinical environment. and retrospective testing. We do that a lot in our world of radiology, wherein we don't go live directly into a radiology clinic. We just extract some old records or previous studies, uh, de-identify them and run them on AI solutions and see how that performs in a retrospective kind of testing before going into a live clinical ecosystem. The other piece of this is you have to explain the value or be clear in your own mind about what value does this new technology offer to the clinical systems, right? Again, here I'm going to bring in our own example of providing or even talking about value to hospitals using our technology. Right? Our technology briefly is that we are building a platform. It's called we have this platform called CARPL, which is specifically intended to be used by hospitals, the radiology departments of hospitals or radiology clinics, right? All these imaging studies that are done in these radiology clinics can be processed through several different AI applications today, and insights can be obtained from these applications, which can help the doctors. Or in some instances where radiologists are in scarce, some of these tools can also generate a completely automated report, which of course needs to be finally verified by some kind of human before getting delivered to the patient. So that's the kind of technology we are building. When we talk about our technology, the value of our technology, what we do is we consider the healthcare ecosystem into four different buckets. Right, the one is the large hospitals with radiology departments. The other is single specialty hospitals with radiology departments. The standalone diagnostic centers, which doesn't do anything beyond just getting a scan done and giving out the report. And the fourth are the primary care centers, which don't have much of the radiology bandwidth. Probably they have just an X-ray machine or even a small ultrasound machine there. So these are four kind of buckets in which we divide the healthcare services. It might differ depending upon what's the technology. For example, for a robotic unit, so the primary care center and diagnostic center doesn't make sense. It might be just a multi-specialty or a super specialty hospital, or even healthcare camps, surgical camps. So depending upon what's the technology, this healthcare service lines might be different. And each of these service lines will have their own subdivisions of disciplines wherein we can apply their technology to. Right, in our case, we divide that into individual clinical specialties, starting from endocrinology, neurology, orthopedics, cardiology, oncology, and going all the way to pediatrics and surgical discipline. Again, that might depend upon what is your new technology. These disciplines where your technology will be relevant might vary, but it's a framework in which you should approach when you talk about value of your technology. So on one side, there's healthcare services. The other side, is the value which your technology is offering. Any value to healthcare provider can be broadly categorized into one of these four buckets. Number one, as I always talked about, is outcomes, right? Whether your technology or how your technology will help improve the ultimate outcome of the patient, right? Whether it increases their lifespan, reduces their mortality, reduces their pain, reduces their morbidity. It could be anything, right? You should be very clear about what is the value in outcome terms that your technology is providing. The second is reducing the healthcare cost, right? So today there are several operations which can be kind of avoided, or the cost of these clinical operations can be reduced by using a technological intervention. We have to figure out in what ways your technological solution or your tech solution is going to help hospitals reduce their cost. The third bucket, unfortunately, we talk about that when you talk about values, that revenue, right? Many of these corporate systems operate on revenue model, wherein your technology solution will give need to give them an insight of how is it possible for them to improve their revenues. The fourth category is the R&D division, right? The research and development part of any hospital or healthcare clinic is very important for them, because they need to test all the possible technology advances in a sandbox environment, so that they can extrapolate that to their broad use cases. So is your tool helping their R&D costs come down, or helping them do a better R&D kind of performance than what they're doing today? So you have to think about all these four buckets. You have to fit your solutions value in one of these four buckets before going and approaching for validation in clinical environments, right? If your bucket is just going to kind of improve their R&D performances, you have to be very clear about who is the person who are going to talk to about validating your solution. So that helps in that way. And again, if you talk about outcomes, the outcomes can be modified by preventing a disease come from happening, or offering a better treatment, or offering a better surgery. If you're talking about R&D, are you helping them to do better cost efficient clinical trials? And some of these hospital systems are also incentivized in structuring their data, right? The big data is where all these new insights will come from. Whether your new technological tool or technological intervention will help them to structure their data in such a way that they can build more insights from the data which they are collecting every day, or the data which they have in their cold storage, right? And also you can help some of these hospitals to build IPs around new tech products, right? So they can build something upon your tech layer to their own IP is one value which some of these hospitals can derive from your solution. So that's a broad kind of framework. Again, this framework which you see in front of you is very specific. We built for our platform, but some of these principles beautifully translate to the other types of tech solutions that everyone is building. So I want to walk through very specific case studies from CARPL. How did we go build evidence in the retrospective setting before going on to the prospective clinical environment? This might kind of get a little bit very radiology specific. I'm happy to kind of explain this in more generic terms during the Q&A session, right? So if you talk about radiology AI, the most common type of models that exist today are called image classification models. What they literally do is you feed in any radiology image, be it a CT scan, X-ray, ultrasound, they'll be able to kind of classify that image into one or other buckets based on presence or absence of a particular disease, a present or absence of a particular disease entity, or any other kind of normal or abnormal kind of broad classification. So that's the major type of radiology AI solutions are available today. That's the major type of solutions that we have onboarded on our platform. Now, before going to any hospital and asking them to test these solutions on their clinical environment, what we typically do is we do a retrospective testing. We extract some data, or help them themselves extract data from their cold storage, assign labels for those data, help them using our tech stack to label those things, and then run those images, the retrospective de-identified images, on these solutions and figure out how they perform on the retrospective data using several statistical performance metrics. So this is one of the study which we did, wherein we uh, evaluated a chest X-ray classification model, just as label a chest X-ray into a normal or abnormal chest X-ray, and we did that using retrospective data first, wherein we were able to prove to a clinic that it has a very good sensitivity and specificity as compared to the ground truth that was established from the reports. So then we then move on to the prospective testing here. Similarly, this is another kind of solution, a lung CT nodule detection solution. It is able to automatically predict the presence of a cancerous or a non-cancerous nodule in a lung CT scan. Again, to before unleashing the solution in the clinical environment, we need to test it in the retrospective data. We helped the hospital extract their own data, label the data, or add labels from their biopsy results to the data, run that to different AI applications, and also parallelly, kind of we tested the performance of radiologists on this de-identified data. There's one thing, right? Letting radiologists use the solution in their workflow and then taking inputs from them. The other thing is how do we replicate their environment in a retrospective control setting to compare the performances. We did that, and we were able to show to the hospital that this particular AI solution was performing much better than all the radiologists. Again, in that controlled testing, there are some limitations to the controlled testing. So then we can then pitch to them that why don't we take it to the clinical environment to test that whether this controlled testing really translate uh, into the clinical practice also. So that becomes an easy conversation now, right? So rather than just directly going and telling them, why don't you plug our solution into your clinic and start playing with that? We, number one, we demonstrate retrospective evidence, preclinical evidence to them. Sorry. Number two, also clearly articulate the value of the solution to them. So that kind of convinces the clinician to start using it in the clinical practice. The second important rule is we need to understand the clinical validation designs very well. It's very important because, before asking for a validation in the clinical environment, we need to know, sorry about that, how do we want to design the study in the clinical environment. Today, the most preferred kind of study design is the RCTs, the randomized clinical control trials, wherein you have one wing of patients without the technology intervention, the other wing of patients with the technology intervention, and then compare how the outcomes do. That's the ideal design. Having said that, that's very, very difficult to do, to replicate. There are several layers of scrutiny we need to pass through before doing that. There are several hacks to kind of bypass this and make it easy for the clinicians to replicate this, the workflow. I will come there. But before going there, we need to understand the designs of all of these different possibilities of doing the validation. The most preferred, again, even before clinical randomized clinical trials, will be an outcome analysis. You do an intervention today, wait for 4, 5, 6 years, and to see does it really translate into a clinical outcome. If you are doing, a population-based intervention, if you are doing a weight reduction intervention, does it really reducing the weight really translate into reduced heart diseases, reduced episodes of strokes, and all those kind of outcome evaluations is very time consuming. They run in several years. In fact, people do that, it will take 10 years, 15 years to prove value. But that's not possible if you're coming with a new technology and you want an immediate adoption in clinical practice. The third important area is the prospective trials. You just do a technology intervention and follow up what happens in time point without a predefined kind of hypothesis. You observe what happens, and then you kind of modify your use case or value according to the outcomes, or even design according to the outcomes. It goes in with a less rigorous design, but a more flexible kind of approach. Again, bringing in radiology example here. So today, many radiology AI companies have solutions which are very mature enough to be used in clinical environments, but almost all of them, 80% of them, the evidence is purely retrospective validation studies, right? Be it Google, Stanford, or anyone. What they have today very much available is the retrospective validation studies based on the preclinical trials. Some of them have done quality control experiments wherein they have proven value in improving the quality of radiology reports, the quality of the errors, the reduction of the errors of the radiology reports. That kind of experiments people have done. Quite recently, in the last few months, we are seeing vendors coming out with randomized control trials. Just a couple of weeks back, the Lunit, one of the big radiology AI company based out of South Korea, came out with a very robust randomized control trial wherein they have demonstrated on 10,000 patients how using their solution will help identify lung cancer uh, very prospectively as compared to not using it without their solution. As far as I know, no outcome studies have been published in the radiology AI space. That's where people are working on today, but again, they will take time. But if you have a good kind of design, if you have a good kind of vision and hypothesis, you can go to the clinic with your clear outcomes which you want from the trial, and then get that validation study done. And even if you define your success criteria very clearly, you can also convince the healthcare provider to start using your solution or technology tool in their practice. Rule number 3: be flexible and creative to overcome the resource constraints of the clinical side. Again, this is very important to understand from the clinical side. As young people who are building technology tools, we don't understand the limitations of the clinical side, right? We need to be very cognizant of the resource constraints, and how can we kind of do a creative design of the studies in such a way that with whatever resources are available in the clinical uh, ecosystem, we achieve our goal, right? Again, I will use our own case study as an example here. I was talking about the classification models of one type of radiology AI tools. The second major type of AI solution that are available today is what we call as the segmentation models. In simple terms, what it means that you give a stack of studies, be it an MR study or CT study. These models will be able to segment out a particular organ structure or an anatomy from that image stack, and provide some predictions on that. So the most common example is prediction of dementia or Alzheimer's disease on MR scans. So what these models do is, when you feed in an MRI brain, the entire study, they'll be able to segment out the critical parts of the human brain and compare them, the volumes or the sizes of those critical parts of the human brain, to the known existing standards, and able to predict the possibility or the impending neurological decline that the particular patient might encounter. Now that's the model, right? That's the hypothesis. You feed in an MRI study, the tool will be able to segment out the brain structure and able to predict the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's. Now, as a radiologist, for me to use that tool, I need to have evidence that it really works. One of the basic tenets, as I said, is it should not be unsafe for the patient. It shouldn't be giving false predictions. To do that, we need to compare the volumes or the segmented, the sizes of the segmentations with a manually made segmentations, right? An MR study has close to 200 slices. A model will do that very rapidly, but for a human to do that, it will take them several hours. But that's how it need to be done, right? You need to compare the model outcome, the model predicted volumes, with a manually predicted or manually measured volumes. And that too, we should do that on several numbers of studies, not one or two studies. It should be several hundreds of studies. Now that's the problem. You have to go to a clinic, convince them to do this kind of comparison. Imagine getting a radiologist to spend hours and hours of time segmenting out certain anatomies from an MRI model. That's not going to happen in a clinical practice. Here is where you can use your creative thinking to kind of help them to do this process faster. One of the ways to do that is, some of uh, these applications already have semi-automated systems which do exist, right? What we can use is, rather than comparing directly your automated solution tool to a manual kind of input, we can compare the existing semi-automated systems. One example I would give here is, before doing any liver surgery, the donor who is going to give liver to a patient undergoes a CT scan, and the donor's liver is studied in multiple dimensions to see what's the volume, what is the size of the right lobe, what is the size of the left lobe, what is the size of the different vessels, different ducts that connect to the liver organs. All those are very studied very deeply before kind of the patient is taken on to the surgery. Today, there are certain tools, semi-automated tools. When I mean semi-automated tools, that means that it needs radiology inputs in each step exist, and they are proven to be robust and they work very well. So, and now there is a new age technology solutions which do everything automatically. You just feed in the image, all those segmentations will happen even without any manual input from the radiologist. To validate that new age solution which does everything automatically, rather than going all the way down to a manual comparison, we can compare that with an existing semi-automated tool and see that how it performs. So that kind of flexibility in the design will help you kind of do that study faster. The other thing which we can do is also we can create a automated label first and then present those labels to the clinicians, ask them to correct wherever they think the label has been incorrect, and then map back the delta, the machine generated labels to the corrected labels, and then figure out how good is the performance in the clinical environment. So these are the kind of hacks which we can do the clinical design, and we have done that. And again, as I said, the example which I quoted here for validating a liver segmentation model, what we did was we took a deep learning based automated model which just takes 2 minutes to give out all those different segments and outputs. We compared that in an existing tool which takes 15 to 20 minutes because we need to give input each of the step. We compared them, and it was found that the automated tool was as good as the existing semi-automated tool. Then we started using that automated tool in the clinical practice. So that's one way of the hack to these tests. The rule number 4, you need to provide right set of tools to the clinicians to do the validation study. This is very, very important because, when you come from the technology mindset, when you come from an engineering background, we take a lot of things for granted, right? We assume that everyone has an operating knowledge of Excel, operating knowledge of some statistical principle, operating knowledge of the viewers in our case. So we take that assumption, but that assumption is not correct because over the period of time, the clinicians and the healthcare providers have optimized their operations in such a way that less of their time is spent upon understanding these different different tools. So they're very much optimizing their workflow. Now, if you want them to be part of your validation processes, you should provide them right set of tools which merge with their existing workflow. It shouldn't be separate. And the entire process of validation should be very user friendly. The results of the validation should be very intuitive, right? I'll show you examples of what I mean by intuitive. It should, and the result should also be very transparent. It shouldn't be like that, you do these kind of validations and then we will get back to you with the results. That's not going to help you because it's not transparent, right? The clinician cannot just be participating in the process without sight into the results. The entire validation study should be designed in such a way that while it is user friendly and intuitive, the result should also be transparent. And the fourth important point is if there are certain limitations or certain failures where the technology fails, it should have a logical explanation which fits into their domain understanding. And they also would have a clear pathway for rectification. I will give a simple example, right? If I'm using an AI tool which can identify lung nodule on chest X-ray, if it ends up finding out something which is not nodule, I should know that what could be the probable reason why this failed in this particular scenario, because I am now doing this testing in a very limited clinical environment. What if I start using it and start relying upon it on my daily practice? How kind of wrong can it go in a real world kind of production environment? I should be well aware of that limitations. So that's why even during the validation design, the design should be in such a way that it should explain the failures and also provide a clear pathway for the clinician to rectify or overcome the alert if they know that that's a failed alert. So I'll give certain examples again from our tech tool itself. This is the part of our technology stack, the platform, wherein we have built in a viewer inside the technology layer. So wherein if you go to a radiologist, if you ask them to validate a particular AI solution, we offer the viewer with the AI outputs as well as the framework to capture their inputs in a single interface, right? If you see here on the left hand side, you see that image, the X-ray study, and within the image you see these bounding boxes, these rectangular boxes. These are outputs from the AI solution. And on the right hand panel, you see that we are taking the inputs from the user. So it's a very simplified interface here, wherein I have my own study, I have the study placed there, the AI outputs, and my ability to capture my feedback is also in the single interface. This is what I mean by a simple interface or a process. Coming to the intuitive, when I say intuitive, it should be kind of, they should see what's happening behind the screen, right? So again, I'm using a very domain specific example here. Happy to go in greater details in the Q&A session. What I'm using here as an example is again is a validation screen from our platform, wherein we are helping radiologists to validate a few hundreds of studies on a particular AI solution. So all these different dots you see here are individual radiology studies, and on the left, in the single screen, the radiologists get an overview of the performance of the solution on these numbers of hundreds of studies. In our world, we use a metric called AUC values. So you see these AUC values here, the sensitivity specificity of the tool on the AI solution on the volumes of studies. All these performance metrics are presented to the clinician in a very intuitive manner. And these dots have different colors. What they mean is the red dots or those cases we call as the true positives, right? It's again a very kind of statistical uh, zing to it. If there is a tool which is helping me to classify a particular image as having a finding or not having a finding, it can either fail in the wrong side, fail on the right side, or it can be correct on the right side or can be correct on the wrong side. So if you draw those four buckets, the four ways in which the AI output can interact with the real world ground truth. So all those different outputs are displayed to the user in a very intuitive manner. So if I'm interested in just looking at the true positive cases, I just go on and click on this and see these true positive or even false positive cases. When the user clicks on this particular false positive cases, the image gets displayed, the AI result gets displayed, and what's the real ground truth for that particular study is also get displayed. So I now understand or make my own opinion around the failure of this particular solution on my data set. Similarly, the other side of the failure, the other extreme of this failure, again, I can click on it, I see the image, I see the AI result, I see the ground truth, and I frame my own opinion. So that kind of intuitiveness, if it is built into your validation process, it will be very attractive to the clinicians. They will participate in the entire validation process very overwhelmingly. The fifth important rule, which I touched upon previously, is never ever try to disturb the existing workflow drastically. This is very important because if you want a clinician who is already kind of optimized their operations for efficiency to take their time out and participate in your validation process, that's going to be a difficult sell. Number two, even if some of the champions who are very much interested in favoring AI solutions, even if they do participate, you are going to have an adoption roadblock. Believe me, if you are building a new technology which is going to have a lot of change management to do, your adoption cycle is going to be extremely long, right? That's why you should be very cognizant of what is the existing workflow today in the clinic. How is my technological intervention going to disturb that workflow? So you can design your studies as well as your own solution in such a way that you don't modify that workflow very drastically. Again, I will bring in an example from our case study. So we wanted to do a prospective study on a particular AI solution in an hospital. Again, doing a prospective study means that uh, you do a randomized kind of control trial wherein you divide the radiology studies in two buckets, wherein the radiologists use your intervention and then uh, mark their opinions. The other bucket, the radiologists don't use the technology solution and mark their findings and then compare them both. Now, while this is an ideal design, what's going to happen is the first step is you're going to hit the roadblock of approvals from relevant clinical uh, systems, the regulatory roadblock or the ethical committee roadblock. Even when you do that without pre-existing confidence on your solution, it's going to be very difficult for the radiology systems or the healthcare systems to follow this design. That's where you can smartly design your validation study in such a way that you don't disturb the workflow, but you capture the information from the workflow in such a way that you are you obtain your objective of doing a prospective evaluation. One of the way we did that is, one of our objective was to evaluate an a prostate solution, a MR prostate solution, which will automatically quantify the prostate volume and also identify the presence or absence of cancerous lesions on prostate. Now, without directly implementing the solution into the workflow, showing the results to the radiologist, what we did was we let the radiologist do their routine reporting, their routine workflow, and complete their clinical report. Once the clinical report is completed, we then extracted that those studies, created a parallel workflow wherein we sent those studies and the AI results to the second radiologist, and then let them make their opinions uh, in assistance to, along with the assistance from the AI tool. Now we have two sets of results here. One is the radiologist who had done the results in his workflow. The workflow is completed, the patient is given the reports, they go away. And the second parallel workflow wherein there is another radiologist who has presented the same studies with an AI results. We have captured their inputs. Now you can compare these two inputs and have a prospective kind of evaluation of how much time would the radiologist have saved when they have kind of followed the AI's inputs, how much accurate they would have been, or maybe sometimes, if the tool is not good, the second radiologist might end up making a critical mistake of missing a lesion also because of the bias that are introduced by these solutions. So by intelligently designing the studies in such a way without disturbing the workflow, your acceptance into the clinical validation processes becomes faster and easier. Okay, having said these 5 rules, I also want to touch upon what are the challenges the clinical validation design might face. While all these are very interesting hacks to speed up your validation process, we should be very cognizant about the rigor of the process, right? We shouldn't compromise on the validation process. The rigority of the validation process should be maintained. And the important process, anything you do with the hospital, very cognizant of the ethics involved in the process. At no point in the validation process, the ethical processes should be breached. It's very important you cooperate, you consider the presence of multiple stakeholders in the validation process. It involves not only the clinicians and the technology providers, it involves the patients, right? And the guardians of the ethical processes, the regulatory bodies. So we should be very cognizant to involve all these different stakeholders during the entire validation process. So just to kind of briefly put together what I've been saying so far, we should be following the best practices in the validation. That's very important. We should follow the ethical considerations. We should be very transparent in what we are trying to do. We should establish a strong, mutually beneficial collaboration between the healthcare providers and ourselves and the patients. And we should always think about doing a continuous improvement in the validation process. And the final line, the baseline is do no harm. None of what we do should end up compromising on the safety of the patient. So I would stop here. Thank you so much for being very patient all along. I will take questions. I'm happy to kind of.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vasanth. If you could also switch on your camera, that would be nice.
Sure.
So excellent talk. It's like a masterclass. I was going through your LinkedIn profile. You have been in assignments where you have been a professor. So that clearly reflects that not only you are an expert in new technologies, you're also an expert in explaining, the hard concepts. So we really appreciate that. And I was, while you were speaking, I was thinking of so many things. So I'm just going to ask few questions, and then there are some questions others have that I may present to you. So the first question I want to know from you is that maybe you will concur with me, although you were speaking from a perspective of landing these technologies in clinical environments, and uh, let's say from a point of view of the people who are responsible for organizing these activities. But if we take a step back, when the tool is built and the developers themselves, when they have built it, maybe they have built it wrongly at first place.
Correct.
And then they bring a tool which needs to be validated. And we have seen in the system, at times, those tools are also, because it's an evolutionary process, sometimes they even make it to the market and later they are recalled, right?
Correct.
So not only the cognizance of these thought processes needed for people who are into the validation process, but people who are also builders, builders of the tools. Just to further illustrate what I'm saying, I believe that if you look at the publications that are happening in AI in healthcare space, I think 95% of those things never make it to the clinical side.
Correct.
So would you like to say a few words to the tool builders? I think most of your presentation would be valid for them as well. If they would have done it right, maybe the success would be. But I would like to hear from your point of views why majority of the AI in healthcare research doesn't make it to the clinics.
Oh, definitely. That's a very, very valid point, Sachin, because the assumption of my presentation, it started with the assumption that you have followed certain minimum required principles in building your tech solution, right? So now, even after having done that, there are several barriers to enter into the validation phase of the clinical environments. I was primarily focusing all along on that part of things. Again, as I said, if you take a step back, during building a clinical tool for a clinical use, should be very, very, very careful, because the most important part there is you need to understand what's the problem you're trying to solve. Always start with the problem, right? Never start with the solution. In radiology AI space, what has happened is the NIH, the National Institute of Health, released 100,000 chest X-rays, open source. Everyone started building tools on chest X-ray, right? Everyone, from even small companies to big companies to giants to vendors, everyone, right? Today, there are 150 chest X-ray AI solutions that are available in the market. Nobody asked the radiologist, do you really need assistance with chest X-ray reporting? You go and ask any radiologist, nobody wanted that. But now these tools are so robust and some of them are performing really good. Now the thought process in the radiology discipline is that if these tools are doing good and reporting chest X-rays, why don't we move on to the next phase and let them do this, right? Because that's the kind of post facto convincing that has happened in the radiology environments, because none of them started with the problem, they started with the solution, the easy solution, because 100,000 chest X-rays were available. Chest X-ray models is a 2D model. You don't need a 3D convolutional model. You just the framework is available. You just need to kind of play with the weights. You have a model, and then you test on the same data set, and then you have a research paper ready. Since the technology was so new, many of these research publications got accepted in the clinical journals, because the clinical journals didn't kind of do a very good, for I would say, peer review work in evaluating whether these studies followed the statistical principles and writing up those publications. The clinical journals started publishing them right, left, and center. So much evidence got built up, but when they came to the adoption cycle, even though the tools are good, the use case was clear, but there was no value to the clinic. It was not really helping radiologists so much. But now, with the availability of such tools, with a lot of convincing done, I think eventually many of these chest X-ray solutions will get accepted in the clinical workflow, and radiologists might end up doing something different. But if we would have started with the problem first, there would not be so much of problem in getting to the adoption cycle. So that's the key. Start with the problem. Don't start with the solution.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Vasanth. I think there is a person here who wants to ask their question. So Dolly ji, please, if you can introduce yourself and ask a question.
Yeah. So I'm Dolly Bhasin. I run a consulting firm and I've been working in the healthcare ecosystem. I'm an electronics and communication engineer, and I'm currently working on medical devices, basically helping people to develop medical devices. I want to know what is the kind of framework in India regarding the medical devices, especially when you integrate AI and you integrate IoT, medical IoT into it.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dolly ma'am. In India, the CDSO has come up with a framework for SAMD registration, right?
Okay.
So software as medical devices, all of these tools need to be registered under the CDSO framework. Again, it's very early days. Not the documents are not very clearly laid out. Since October 2022, that's the mandate. Any software which needs to be used in clinical practice need to have a CDSO registration.
Yeah, it says that in the CDSO this thing, but I couldn't see the details of it as to what they are wanting to test.
Yeah, they have a draft of documents which they require. So I'm happy to kind of connect with you separately. I have a team who works on that very specifically. So we may be able to share more information with you on
Thank you so much. And another question I would like to ask, if I have the permission.
Sure.
So there is a new concept of digital therapeutics. Do we have anything on it in India, or do we are still waiting for everybody else to develop it, and we get onto it after everybody has done that?
Yeah, I was saying that to Sachin before this started. So we have this habit of looking westwards. So when some of these tools get adapted in the West and proven valuable, then probably we will land there. So I'm not an expert in digital therapeutics per se, but at least that's what I've seen in my domain, the radiology AI solutions, as far as the Indian healthcare ecosystem goes. They want evidence from the West.
Right. So corollary to that, at least in the international, there is a clinical trial for the digital therapeutics also, and also for the medical devices with the MIoT integration and AI integration. Is there anything in the CDSO for the medical software devices right now?
SMD falls under the CDSO framework. Software as medical device, all the AI applications, all the
But
radiology
see,
AI
it's not
applications.
software anymore. It is MIoT integrated into the software. The combination of the hardware and the software. Some Internet of Things, whether it is basically for the remote care or for the wearable devices. So there is an integration of the a device which basically picks up the biomarkers and sends it to the cloud.
What category of FDA approval do they fall into? Do they have the FDA approval, this particular?
Right now, I am not aware of the Indian standards. In fact, I have a call waiting. I have a very senior person online waiting for me. I thought I'll just ask this question from you, and then I'll get on to that call.
Sure.
I'm looking at somebody's working on, doctor in UK is working on the same. So we're just trying to really see how a similar doctor is wanting to work in India on this. So trying to really be the facilitator. So I just wanted to know, since this was a very timely session that you had, so I thought I'll attend it and then get on to the call.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So maybe Dollyji, it can be taken offline or later.
Sure.
But
So
Thank you very much for your response.
I will connect you with our team who works specifically on this.
Right. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And I think next we can go with Hitesh. He already had a similar question, which kind of you answered about Indian regulation, but over to you, Hitesh, with your question.
Okay, thank you for the amazing talk, first of all. And regarding to, so I had a question, first of all, regarding on the regulatory front in India for AI in medical devices. So if you could just CC me on that email too, that would be great.
Sure.
And secondly, so currently, as you said, there are a lot of AI and radiology solutions in the market. And mostly these solutions are being adopted in foreign countries, but not in India. So in your perspective and experience, what do you think is the reason that these solutions are not being adopted in India, but are being adopted in foreign countries?
A couple of reasons, Hitesh. The first and foremost is the amount of the value that the incremental value. I would use the word incremental value because many of these radiology AI solutions are still very niche applications, which probably cater to 4 to 5% of a radiologist's work. So the amount of value that these solutions can offer in dollar terms to any radiologist or a healthcare system is very good in the US and the West as compared to India. Right? That's the one reason. The second reason is the infrastructure to execute these applications doesn't exist in many hospitals in India, right? Except for the top tier hospitals, many hospitals doesn't even have PACS systems, the robust RIS systems, or the ability to talk to the cloud, send data to the cloud, receive the results from cloud. All those challenges, but there are secondary challenges. The primary challenge is the value that these niche applications that they can offer to Indian healthcare institutions is very minimal as compared to the US or European institutions.
All right, understood. So is this because of the unit economics of the different markets? Okay, understood.
Correct. For any AI application, the US hospital can say, I'm just throwing out a random number. It may not make sense in real world, and don't quote me on that. So for any chest X-ray solution, the US hospital can pay anywhere between $2 to $3 or even up to $5. In India, the chest X-rays can be read by a radiologist for 15 rupees. Right. So what does the AI solution get out of it? Right. 5 cents, 10 cents. It doesn't even make sense, correct, for the AI vendor to get to use in Indian hospitals.
Understood. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Hitesh. So next we can have Harmanjot. Are you online, Harmanjot? If you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Harmanjot. So, I'm a high school student from India itself. So I had a query. I was really inspired by the work that you are doing by integrating healthcare with AI technology. And so I have been doing something similar, but it's related to more of IoT. So I've been trying to devise something using sensors, biomedical sensors to monitor our mental health. And so, but I've developed a working prototype for it, but still I'm facing difficulties as to how I can perform pre-clinical validation and testing for it.
I'm inspired by you, Harmanjot. You know, I never expect a high school student to attend my talk on new technology in AI. It's very inspiring. Thank you for attending this, and your challenges are very kind of pertinent, Harmanjot, because the kind of space you are working in, sensors for mental health, is kind of very unique space. Not much is understood well about mental health, not only in India, across globe. So one area where you can kind of do your maybe homework, Harman, is that see what kind of international research studies have been published using the same kind of methodologies and tools you have developed, right? I am not an expert on IoT, sorry for that, but if there are a particular type of sensors you are using, there's a particular type of mental health attribute you are monitoring, just go to PubMed or any Google Scholar or any other research portal, see what kind of research studies are being done, what's the evidence that they have seen for the benefits, collect them, put them together, in a place, and try to see the similarities between what they have done and what you are doing. And one thing you have to again prove is that whatever sensor you're using is, I hope it will be completely safe, and then go identify a champion in this area, who is working on this area in India, in Delhi, in hospital. Go and connect with them on social media, and kind of explain your proposal to them, and I'm sure they will help you with that. I'm happy to kind of uh, mentor you on this, Harman. Do drop me an email and share with me more details around what you're working on, and happy to connect you with on the right person who will be interested in that.
Thank you very much, sir, for the answer and for the mentorship as well. Sir, I would surely connect with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harman and Dr. Vasanth. Harman is a young innovator from Jammu. So he's part of our club, and as you rightly said, it's always inspirational to see, right ideas coming from all quarters. And Harman is a good inspiration for many. So I had actually thought of asking you many more questions, but I thought maybe the others should get, priority over me. But I will still take the liberty of asking you one or two questions, which basically they are linked with some of the questions that other participants had. I believe an organization like you can build their intellectual property in one way, which is to build a very good data set. So you talked about NIH releasing 100,000 chest X-ray, and that kind of creating like a, if we take it in a positive spirit, a lot of people getting attracted to it. In a similar way, an organization like yours maybe have some of these gold standard data sets, right? And as you rightly said, if the tool is to be validated around data, right, which if we take specific example of chest X-rays, right, what does it take to build a good data set? Is it just the compilation of X-rays? Is it structured observations around them? So are there any best practices around that, if you would like to share? And I'm also imagining, if we as a country have to move forward, could government create high quality data sets? Would it increase or improve the way we look at things today? So over to you.
Sure. Data is everything, correct? If you're building new AI solutions, you need data. The government can help in many ways. The number one is there should be a clarity around policy clarity on how data can be open sourced. Today, there's so much data that is available in government institutions like AIMS, PGI. Go to any institutions, they have. I'm not talking about specifically about radiology data. I'm talking about general healthcare data. And we saw PGI's data getting hacked and by ransomware, all those news. There is not much policy clarity around how can someone, an interested researcher inside that institution, can openly release data without kind of worry or fear that it might not go well, there kind of some kind of investigation that might come upon me at the later point of time. That kind of clarity around policy clarity would really help, because many of these government institutions want to release data. Our parent company also want to release all of this data. We have done that in a very small way by collaborations with some of these AI companies. In fact, we work with Cure to release a CQ500 data set, which has 500 HCTs with labels from 3 radiologists. We've done that. So that's the one thing. The second thing about, again, when we talk about data, a lot of data, most of these data are lying unstructured, right? We need to provide some kind of structure to the data, good structure, so that it's useful to build any kind of insights around them. To do that structure, either you do that using manpower, and you need to have dedicated manpower. In fact, there could be special streams that can be created in colleges or even higher education streams, wherein people are just trained on providing structure to healthcare data, right? It's very simple, right? You teach them how a real structure looks like, teach them how an unstructured data looks like. You just, it's how MTrack works, right? Yeah, Amazon used to label a lot of these images using MTrack, open sourcing that, and then getting incentives for that, right? You can create additional streams of people who can structure the data. The third, technology can help, right? Several large language models, NLP models are being coming out day in and day out. You can use them to provide structure to the data. Imaging specifically is very, very challenging because, again, as I said during my presentation, all the clinical operations have been optimized in such a way that they never had any incentive to capture data in a structured format, right? If I am a receptionist at an imaging center, the patient comes to me and RAS is in front of me, I don't have any incentive to correctly enter the date of birth of that patient in the date of birth tab in the RAS. Today there is no incentive, so I don't do that. I want to do that entry faster and get that patient into my clinic and get that done out faster. So I don't do that. So I'm optimized that if that input is not needed, I don't provide that structure. But if your tool needs data with birth date, you won't get that, because that was not never captured in the first place. So there should be enough incentives or education to the healthcare service providers, or each participant of the healthcare service provider, be it the receptionist who's making that entry on the RAS, or the technician who's making entry on the modality or the X-ray machine. Each of them needs to be taught about the importance of capturing data in a structured way, so that every day as we speak, data is getting captured. We talk about unstructured data for 5 years now. Even if you have started building structured 2-3 years back, we'd have had enough structured data now. So, but nothing is being implemented because not much education is happening on the ground, not much incentives is being offered to modify that process into the process where data is captured in a structured way. So that's one thing. And any tool which is built on an dirty, unstructured data is not going to be useful, right? So that's very critical. Organizations like ourselves are trying to help the ecosystem by providing access to open source tools, open source data sets, But we need a lot more people doing that. We are a small team. We can do only that much, right? We can build the software stack. We can help in providing structure to the data. We can help in providing structure to a certain type of data. But we need a wider participation from the ecosystem, from the healthcare ecosystem or the allied ecosystem to build structure into the existing data.
So last question for the day, although I'm tempted to keep talking to you. So you spoke a specific example of liver segmentation. And I was, recently in north of Norway, and one of my gastrosurgeon friend was showing me for his PhD how he's, segmenting the liver.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, when you have to benchmark an AI-based segmentation versus a human done segmentation, which let's say my gastrosurgeon friend has to do or his radiology counterpart, there's an element of subjectivity how a human would segment it, right? If the same liver image is given to 3 different radiologists. So when you have such subjectivity in the human created segments, for example, and you have to benchmark it against AI, so how do you deal with that subjectivity? If you can say something about it.
Sure. Again, subjectivity is definitely there. If you think of doctors or radiologists, they do 2 kinds of tasks in their everyday practice. One is perception, and the other is cognition. Right? Perception is looking at a particular structure and seeing it is there, it's not there. Cognition is what is that is there is something wrong with the structure is my perception, and what is that is wrong is my cognition, right? The subjectivity is usually in the cognitive phase, right? Mostly the liver anatomy, everyone will agree, because if you see a structure, the demarcation between liver and the surrounding organs are very clear. There won't be much subjectivity there, but there will be subjectivity in, say, categorizing the liver lesion. I would think that it is not a cancer. Somebody else will say that it's a cancer. If you are going to use a human benchmark, it will be failing there. That's where we bring in a hard ground truth. By hard ground truth, what I mean is you need to use a biopsy ground truth there. You need to use an operated specimen looked under a microscope and the cancer being seen as a ground truth, not a subjective ground truth. Even though people are using consensus as a mechanism to weed out subjectivity, a pooled consensus to weed out subjectivity, that needs a lot more human resources to be put in. The best way to do that is your ground truth, where you think there might be a subjectivity, the ground truth should always be a hard ground truth, not a soft ground truth. And there are clear areas where there will be this kind of subjectivity. We can work on that.
Thank you, Dr. Vasanth. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of this conversation. I could not thank you enough. And I really hope that we could invite you for an in-person workshop where I think larger community can benefit a lot. And I'm just thinking aloud as I mentioned that our annual conference this year would be on clinical validation. So maybe I'll speak to Dr. Tav and create a possibility if schedule permits from your end that we have some kind of a master class.
Sure, definitely. Thank you, Sachin. I enjoyed this session. The kind of questions that were asked, it made me even think. So thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. We are grateful to you. And thanks everyone for participating today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.